Also, you have templates. Well, templates is pretty much what your site is going to look and feel. It what puts all the other extensions together inside it, the modules, the components. You have languages which are where you can put your keys and values for your English or other international languages for your website. So it holds all the information that is translated in the front end or the back end. Libraries are themselves like a, how can I say, a factory of code where you can put all your code that would work for different extensions. And packages, finally, are just a group of extensions. You can create packages of plugins or packages of mix of plugins and modules for them to be installed all together at some point on your site. Visually, it's simple. A template is the outside shell. The component usually is the place that goes in. Is an extension that goes into the main content of your template. The plugins can be in the background and the module in the template position. Hopefully, it makes sense so far. I'm going to dive into, we plan today on working on plugins and modules. I'm going to start with plugins because it's the more complex, and I think I'm going to get more attention starting with the most complex stuff. Plugins actually are working on demand. In the Joomla code, there are places where there are little hooks. For example, before a title. In the Joomla code, it says, okay, look at all the plugins that could do something before the title is displayed. We're going to learn how to actually do something like that later on. So we say that Joomla plugins actually work in response to hooks or events. There are different kind of plugins. They all do different things, and they actually work depending on different events. First, the most important, I think, for visual aspects is the content plugins. Content plugins are plugins that will act on the content. They will act on an article, for example. Like I just said, before a title showing of an article, you can have a plugin do something. You can have a plugin do something after an article is added. You can add a plugin, something happening when a plugin, sorry, a content is saved. I'm sorry, I'm getting distracted. You also have system plugins. System plugins are plugins that work for the overall system of Joomla. You can have, if some people are familiar with jQuery, jQuery is a plugin that is a system plugin because it acts on the HTML output of a page. You have authentication plugins. These plugins are working in conjunction with the login of users. You have user plugins. Those plugins actually work when a user profile is saved or modified. You have search or finder plugins, which are plugins used to handle the result of searches. You have editor plugins. An editor plugin is a plugin that handles the editing of the articles. And you have editor extended plugins that actually add like buttons to do like a read more or something like that. That's kind of functionality in Joomla. The CAPTCHA plugins are plugins that add CAPTCHA functionality to forms. And you have quick icons and extensions which work more like in the background, in the backend, sorry. Extension would work when you add an extension, install one or delete one. And quick icons are actually plugins that show little shortcuts or favorites, you know, in bookmarks in your console, admin console, in the main page. Well, since this was kind of a general information, I want to go and dive into creating a basic plugin. First, when you create a plugin, you need to know what it's going to do. What's its purpose? Is it going to be a plugin that will act on modifying a contact, or is it going to be a plugin that will work on an article? Is it going to be something that will just be in the background and work on the HTML code, the output, before it actually goes to the browser of a user? So you have to choose your purpose. Today I'm going to show you a content plugin. The content plugin is the plugin that will work on an article itself. Then you have to choose a name. Choosing a name is not tricky, but you have to be careful, because if you choose a name that already exists in the Joomla extensions directory, you're going to get into trouble, and you're going to have to rename your extensions if you plan on having it available to other users, because the names are unique. For a plugin that is a content plugin, the convention will be to call it PLG for plugin _ content _ the name you give it to. Then you need to include required files that are required by Joomla. Then create a plugin class and a manifest. And I'm going to go into details for all these little steps. I don't know if there are questions. We lost Laura for a minute. Okay, so you should be seeing my code right now. So I already have created a content plugin. And no problem. How you doing? Good. So as I was saying, you have to give it a name. So I called my extension Bear, because it's going to have the bare necessities for a plugin to work. I didn't check in the Joomla extension directory if it exists, because this is just for us. So there's no need for a unique name necessarily. What you need to do when you create a plugin is first make sure you add the licensing. Usually the licensing for extensions in Joomla, you have to use a GNU, General Public License. In Joomla, they ask for the version 2, but I usually go with version 3, which is more recent. At some point, I think Joomla is going to extend their version to version 3. But this file needs to be in the package you're going to have when you give your extension. Another file that's important, and this file needs to be in every directory of your application or extension. It's an index.html file. You can put anything you want in it. It's a file that if someone accesses your website to a specific directory, this is the file that person will see, instead of seeing the directory of your application. This is a way of making it a little more secure and avoid people diving into your code, especially hackers and stuff. So if you have an index.html file, they won't see what files are in your application. They will see the output of that file. In this case, they won't see anything. This is a requirement for Joomla. You need to have those. If you don't have those, you won't pass the test and won't be added to the Joomla extension directory. And I will show you afterwards what you can do to help and get your application accepted in the Joomla extension directory in the JAD. Then you have a regular class that contains the name of your plugin and the PHP extension. In this class, that's where everything is going to do work in your plugin. In this case, the first few lines of your application, first you have to start with PHP, for those who are familiar with PHP. Then you need to go up with the copyright of your software. These need to be in every single file you have, every single PHP file. So basically, you put the copyright with your name and which license is used, and make a reference to the license file. Then what comes afterwards, it's a necessary line that you also need to put in every PHP file of your application. It's a little mystery line, but it actually tells the system that you're inside a Joomla environment.
Define J, exec or die, that's the line you're talking about?
Yes.
Okay.
The JEXEC is actually a variable that is set up by Joomla, and if it doesn't exist, your file is not accepted.
Can you make that screen a little bit bigger so when people are looking at it? Like
I can make.
Can you scroll in on it?
Yeah, I can see. I can make it.
Zoom a little bit. I think that may make it easier for people to see on their screen.
Okay. I can make actually the font bigger.
Yes, right. Just a little bit. Yeah, just a little bit.
Control on the
That's really good.
Like
Yeah, that's good.
that.
Good.
Should be. All right. Do you have? Oh yeah. Actually, I didn't notice, but you can see it on the screen here.
Yeah, that's why we're together.
Let me see. I'm going to do something. Sorry, I'm just going to adjust for people who are here. This will be already duplicated. Okay, that should work. Okay, good. Yeah, sorry about that. So the defined JEX or die is something that tells that your software is legitimate to Joomla. Then when you're in a plugin, you also need, we're talking about plugins for Joomla 3. You need to have that line, the jimport line, telling that you're going to get all the juicy code that works with and for plugins. So you will not have to set up anything else. You're going to use the code that's already in Joomla. Then I made this. I'm going to let you know at the end of this session that I put all the code on Git, so you can get the code afterwards if you need to download it, so you have a base to work with.
Can you give me a zip of it? So I can email it to the people that attended?
Yeah, definitely. No problem. Then you need to create a class, and you just type class, and hopefully everybody has knowledge of a little coding. You create a class with the name of your plugin. This time you take away the underscores. So PLG content and the name of your plugin, and you extend the J plugin that comes from with Joomla. So all what I'm going through right now is the bare necessity you need to have when you create a plugin. The other things you need to create your plugin is the auto load language set to true. This will tell your plugin to use the language file that you're gonna have packaged with it. Then you get into all the events that a content plugin has. And I'm gonna go to a page. Same thing. I'm gonna give you all the links.
You have to share the web browser with us.
Yes. I'm getting to the page first, and then I share. Yeah. Okay. I forgot what is this.
I think that's it.
That's it. Yeah. Okay. Getting used to it.
Cool, it works.
Yeah. There's a page in Joomla in the documentation where they explain all the events that are available for all the plugins. But we're going to concentrate on the content one only, so you can not too much sidetracked. These are all the content events that are available. These are once, for example, if I'm going to go to the last content after title. When the content after title event is targeted, all the plugins that have the code of the on content after title will trigger. So if I have on content after title in my plugin, my content plugin, I know that the code that will be put in it will work. I create it here. An on content before display. The on content before display is what is going to show before my page is going to actually display. My article is going to display. There are a few parameters that are coming into that function. First, the first parameter is context. This is a variable that contains all the information about where you are in the context of an article. Are you in the article itself? Are you in the category of an article? Are you in a blog? Are you in the featured articles? That's where the information is going to be. Then you have the variable article or item. You can name it as anything you want, but this will contain all the content of your article. Params afterwards is the variable that will contain all the parameters of the articles, which these parameters are the ones that are you going to see that you're set with your articles, so all the little options you see in the backend of Joomla. So if you show the title, if you show or not, if you show the category or not. Then page is something that's not very much used. It actually works mostly when you're in a blog environment. It tells you in which item of the page you're on, how can I explain? It's actually when you are on the blog of an article, for example, you have like for example 5 articles. It tells in which one you are on. If you are on the first one, the second one, the third one. But most of the time, it's you work on one article and it will always be 0. For example, here, and I forgot to set up something. So give me 1 second. Here, I would say, take the article, take its title, and just add it a little text called testing plugin. So whenever I'm going to show an article on my website, just before it displays, this code will be called, and we'll add the testing plugin code. I will show you what it actually does. And I turn off the page. Oh, okay. Just give me 1 second. I just added this piece of code in my title.
Is that going to be now on every title, obviously?
Yes.
On every page of the website?
And every page, it will be on the blog part, everywhere. Everywhere I will show an article, because I didn't specify anything else. But I'm going to show you that if I can specify something. Okay. As earlier, as I was explaining earlier, you have the variable context. You can do some testing about that. You can say, am I in content article, or am I in a category, or am I in the featured article? You can do some testing about like that. So you can say, take that, because right now my code is showing that change in every single place on my website, but I can just say if context equal contact article. I'm just gonna do. I'm sorry, I'm confused because I use a French keyboard when I work. I'm terrible. And just put that in here. Then by doing that, I'm just going to do this change only when I'm in an article. I will not see that change if I'm in blog. I'm not going to see that change if I'm in a featured article. I should have done the change somewhere else, because I'm going to change it in the actual code of the website. I should go into that. Like I'm changing. No, I'm changing. I'm going to change the. I already had installed my plugin on the website to show you that the results. But what I'm going to do is I'm going to look for that code after it's been installed. It's going to be when you create a plugin that is a content plugin. You just go to your website, go to plugins, content, find the name of your plugin. This is where it's there. Then go to the class, then just go change the code. You're not changing Joomla's code, you're changing your own code. You can just, then you save it. And then you go to your website. Well, I'm going to do it. I don't need to do refresh because I'm already in the context of a page, of of an article,
If you go to a category blog, it won't display it.
but if they're in a blog, and it doesn't show.
Question.
Yeah.
If there are multiple plugins registered on the same event, do they chain the content together?
Yeah, they are chained, and
Can you just repeat the question?
yeah. I'm going to repeat the question. If I have several plugins working on the same event, do I need to do something about it? Because they're going to be chained. You have to actually go to your backend. Go look at your plugins. Do a little search on the content plugins only, so that you only see the ones. So all these are going to be the ones that may trigger that event. The thing is that you need to order them to know which one is going to be first and which one is going to be last. It was a little easier before in Joomla 2.5 because you had, when you ordered the plugins, you had a number, 0, 1, 2, 3.
Why do they want that? Angry.
Yeah.
They
Yeah,
talked about that
yeah.
in 2.5.
The thing you have to know is that all the plugins, when they're installed in Joomla, they all have the number 0. 0 is what triggers first. But if all your plugins have 0, then they all trigger. You can't do the order. You don't know which one is going to first start. But
How do you reset them so they're not all set to 0? Do you have to manually go into each one?
well, the thing is, you want to order the plugins the way you want them to hit your page. So you have to actually go to that list I'm showing you right now. You only use the enabled ones, and you just move them around. Make sure that the first
So
or
just
last
by
one,
moving it
just by
back.
moving them, you're gonna order them. I get a lot of support actually on that one with jQuery Easy, because sometimes there are plugins that are in that do some work on pages, and jQuery Easy does something, and then a plugin does reverse it, and then it gets all disordered. So you have to. This is something that can be on a content plugin. It's not very important because most of the time they will all do their thing, and it's not going to affect anything. But system plugins are usually the ones that can be messed up by not being ordered properly.
As a developer, you can't set up priorities.
No, no, it's when it's installed. You install it. When you install it, it becomes the last one to start. The first one to start. Sorry. So you have to think about that when you have all your plugins. That's why you don't want to have too many plugins, because after a while it can become a nightmare to know why this didn't occur but this occurred, and vice versa.
And the context of testing, the Joomla doesn't give your code any clue as to what other plugins have run before.
No, you have no idea what else works. You don't know if you're the only one who's going to do some change here. You have to sometimes pray in silence. But no, most of the time everything works fine. It just gets complicated when people get into installing plugins and not disinstalling them. Keep some current, some enabled, and even though they don't want them, you just keep the plugins you really need and make sure they're in the order you want them to show, especially the system ones. Other than that, you should be fine. here, I've done a little more complex code. Here, this is another event called onContentPrepare. That's before the code is even, that's before the code is even gonna be set up for the output, for the HTML output. So here, I created a variable called ConProceed, and I tell him, well, okay, if I'm in an article, or if I'm in a category, or if I'm in a featured article, it will be true. So if it's not true, I want to return. So then that tells Joomla, if I'm not in the context of an article, just give up and go do something else. If you can continue, then you can get a variable called application. This is a major variable that contains a lot of information for a website. It actually tells you here, you ask him if you are in an admin environment or not. This is very important because your plugins, when you create them, they work in the front end and the back end, unless you tell them not to work in the front end or the back end. So you have the is admin available, and you have is site available. In this case, I just use is admin, and if I'm in the admin environment, I return true. I don't want to do anything with it, with my plugin. Now I'm going to stop here for the PHP. There's a main file that is very important when you create a plugin. It's called the manifest file. It has a name of your extension. That's actually is the how can I say? It's the configuration file for your application. It tells Joomla what it's going to do, and it gives all the parameters that are going to be available and stuff like that. The first thing you do when you create a manifest file is you tell him that's an XML file. So you have to be a little familiar with XML, but if you don't know XML, it's not too hard to understand it. The XML that's included in those files is pretty simple. Basically, you start with an element called extension that will work for all the extensions you work with Joomla. So it can be a plugin, can be a module, a component, a package, a library, a language file. You call it extension. Then you give it a type. Here in this case, we create a plugin type. You give it a version number. The minimum version number it will work in Joomla. In this case, I want my plugin to work in Joomla 3.1 and over. Plugins are part of groups, like I explained earlier. You can be a content plugin, a system plugin. So you have to tell in which group your plugin is going to go into. So for example, here, our plugin is going to go into the content group. Then you give it an extra variable called method, an extra attribute, I should say. It tells actually Joomla that whenever a user is going to install your extension, is going to upgrade it and not delete the other version and replace it with a new one. It's going to just modify the files that have been modified. Then, pretty standard for all Joomla extensions, you have to give in a name attribute. So that's the name you gave it to earlier. Then you give it a version number. Usually you start with 1.0.0. Sounds pretty easy. There are three numbers. The first number is called a major update number. The second number is called the minor update number. And the third number is called the patch number. What that means is that the third number when you change it, for example, to 101, it means that your application got some fixes. So this is to help get rid of all those bugs that came up with after a major release, for example. So that's where you change the number. You change the second number when you have new functionality. That's not going to break the previous versions. And then that's when the major update number is actually the number that will tell your user, well, you may have some things broken in the background when you update. And usually, if your extension developer has done his work well, you should know what's going to break. So it should be documented. What may break? Sometimes there's nothing that breaks. Sometimes there's background compatibility. Then you add the attribute creation date. That's what when you created your extension. So this is a date that will never change. So the first time you come out with your extension, it's going to be the date, and we leave it at that. It's not a modification date; it's a creation date. Then you need to add all those copyright, license, author, your author email, URL if you have a website. These are not required, but strongly you should just put them in there. Then you have a script file, but I will come to that later. You have a description attribute that will actually tell users what your extension actually does. Usually you want, it looks like weird to some people, it's just something that will be translated in the background so that my description can be seen by users of different languages. That I go into that in the language files afterwards also. Then you have to set up which files you have in your extension. You're actually going to enumerate only the files that you have at the root of your extension. So here I have a few files: bear.php, bear.xml, index.html, installer.php, license.txt. You don't have to actually put everything. Bear.xml is the file we're in, so we don't have to put it there. License.txt, I put them, but it's not required. You can have the license as a file in your folder of your extension, but it doesn't have to show on the user site itself. So you don't have to put it there. All the files that we actually naming in here are the files that are going to be installed by Joomla. So you may or may not want to install the license.txt. It's up to you. But I like to put it there. The index.html is required. You have to have it. And that's about it. The installer.php is a file that we're going to talk in a minute. Is already named here in the script file, so you don't have to name it again. And that's about it for now. And if you had a folder which would contain more files, then you have to just name the folder. If I had a folder, I can just say folder. And easy enough. Okay, my folder. Then I don't have to do what's in there. Joomla will know that there's going to be some files in there, and you don't have to enumerate them. You just enumerate your folders. Then there's a space in the file where I can set up all the languages I'm going to be using for that extension. Here I just have English set up, but every time you set up a new language, you have to find the language code and then tell them where they are. Actually, we are in the view of the website, which is not good. I should go in here. So you can see on the left side, I have a folder called language, and in it I have a folder called engb, and in it I have my language files for the extension, and it always has to be written the same way. It's engb that view plugin that init, and you have another one sys.init. There are two different files for languages. That ini is whatever is going to show in the front end, and this sys.ni is the one that's going to show in the back end. So that means system. So for instance, here for my plugin, I have the name of my plugin. I have the description file that I had here, the name here, that I want to be translated. And then I have extra stuff that I want to have in my plugin. I can come to that later. And here are the fields and values that I will have in the front end when people see some keys that I can put in the code. I just don't have anything so far here. I didn't show you anything so far. So that's for the language files. All the manifest files in Joomla for every kind of extensions are identical. You have the extension, the type of the extension, then all the naming and licensing and authoring stuff, a place for an installer file that will work only when you install the application or update it, a description, the files that are in your extension, the language files that you have already set up, and then you have the parameters that you want be able to be changed in the background, in the backend. Sorry. You always start with a config. You always have a fields params. That's something that's conventional in Joomla. Then you have field sets. Field sets actually represent each and every tab you're going to have in your plugin or extension. For example, here in my bare plugin, I have only the plugin type. It's actually called the basic in the code, the basic tab. But you can add other tabs. From here. If I was gonna call it test with the same parameter, so what did I do?
Can both parameters have the same name?
Yeah, maybe that's the problem, yeah. Actually. Yeah, it's actually this problem. I want it to be too fancy. I have all these extra windows on top of my code that you don't see. Okay, okay. Okay, I don't know what the hell is going on. Wait, what did I do wrong? Yeah, I know. I didn't put it in the right place. Okay. I dissociated my fields. Okay. And as you can see, it's a different tab now. When you create, every single field set gives you a different tab. You can see that here, it's by default it gives me this. Yeah, you have to put it in a language file. So if you put that com plugins test, that's one that's made up by Joomla. So you want to create your own. And you say and then you would put, okay, I want to start all my stuff with PLG content bear, and then I'm going to call it test. Now after that, I should be saying the name I gave it, and then that I use it, I put it in my language file. I don't know if you know where languages are, because when you install your extension, your languages are not with the extension anymore. They go into two different places. Language here, but you won't find your plugin here. For some reason, the plugins are only in the administration. They could be over there on the other side too, but if you find me one, we are working on the backend. If I call it, is it the right place? Oh, if I do the same thing, that's not gonna work. Okay, like that. S. Please see if it looks fine. I have my tab. So then, plugins very often don't have any parameter or very little. Just if you go, for example, contact, I think there's no parameter. You just need to be enabled. So you will really have to know what they do by the description.
Can we just check to see if anyone has any questions? Can you just ask the group?
Yes. Yeah. Is there any question? Do you have? Oh, there's so many people online. Because I go pretty fast or pretty slow depending on your level of coding. So I'm sure there should be some questions already.
Okay. I just sent a message out.
The thing is that when keep going.
Yeah.
Okay. Whenever you go into code, there's always something that brings some other information, that brings some other information. So here we're in the fields, but you may want to know what fields are available in Joomla, because there are a lot of them. Right now, the field I entered is a text field. I called it additional label. It's a text field. When you are in the backend of Joomla, you go in there. It's just basically text. You can just enter. It's a string. You can enter. For now, my parameter doesn't do anything. Just as an example.
the Joomla will save that for you?
Yes, when it's saved, it's put in a specific space in the database. So you have your plugin, and you're gonna have sometimes it's called params, sometimes it's called something else. In the params section of your row of the database that actually contains all the plugin information, you have a JSON object that contains all your fields and not the names but the values that are given to them.
Even if you did not create a table for this specific plugin, it's still storing the data.
Yes, it's stored automatically by Joomla. All the information you're going to have about your extension plus the parameters you set up in that extension and the parameters that have been changed by the user are saved into the database automatically. You don't have nothing to do. You don't have anything to do. And so you close it after or 7 close, and you know that the data is available. And you have done nothing on the code, in the code. But just as a parenthesis, I'm going to tell you there's a space in the Joomla documentation where they actually name all the fields that are available that you can put in your forms for the user to enter information. You have text boxes, you have colors, you have content types, you have editors. You can put even an editor, a field that contains an editor. You have a field for emails, for files, for media files. You can even have hidden parameters that if you have a parameter in your plugin that you want to have available for some reason in the background. You have integers that you can have a list of 10 numbers as a drop down. You have pretty much, I mean, it's pretty exhaustive. I try to keep using those in my extensions, but I actually found out that to make some fields more user-friendly, you have actually to create extended version of those standard ones. Like if you want to add extra examples or explanation for a field, you have to make it a little different. Create your own. You can create your own form fields. So you're not stuck with just those. You can extend your own. That could be another session because it's very interesting to create your own form fields.
And what would the form fields be used for?
This is all the forms that are available for user input. Most of them are. Some are used for the background, backend of Joomla. But for example, the radio is one of the common ones. It's like you can set it up in your form to have a yes/no or a choice between two values. You have a spacer, which would add a space in your form to separate your parameters, so it looks more friendly and more easy to read. You can even have a whole SQL query in as a field. So you would look, for example, for all the contacts that are published and that have a email address, and then it will show in as a drop down. They have some new ones, some interesting ones that, for example, a subform is very interesting. But now you can have a form of forms in your parameters. I've tried to work on that. One is quite powerful, but still a little buggy, so I'm not using it yet. And then you can also specify what kind of information you want in your text field, for example. So here I have the field additional label, which is a text field. I can give it a default value. I can give it a name and a description that need to be translated. These are the things that are going to go in the language files. But you can also add a filter. And there's a set of filters that are available. I can say that I want it to be an integer. So then default I will say 0. So then if the user gives anything else that's not an integer, it's not going to be able to save that form. It actually forces user input to the value you want. So this is for the fields. We basically went around most of the main information about creating a plugin. There are a few other things that are interesting to know. There's a section that it could be also a whole section of a whole discussion. It's about how to update, make available updates of your application in the Joomla environment. Update servers is actually a little piece of code that tells Joomla when you have an update available, and it will actually show in the Joomla console as an update. So when you go in here, in your website, and you go update, that's where your plugin will show if you have set up an update server.
So I have a question. So we have a custom module that we create that we're just using inside of records.
Mm-hmm.
We could put that update server in, and because our module only exists on ours,
That's how we set up the courses.
but we don't have the issue here.
We just because we never set up that XML file for the server.
Right. That's cool.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's
When you do an update, that's cool.
Yeah, it's all ready to go. We just have to.
yeah, it's just a little. Then you have you just have to have actually when you have in your code where you say where your XML file that will tell there is an update is located, and that's basically the only thing you have to do here. And on the server, for example, here I have it in this website. This XML file called bare content plugin update is the one that contains the newest information about the software, about the update, the new version. And Joomla every time you go into that page or you turn on Joomla, checks every single extension and goes to every single server and checks if there is an update. It goes pretty fast, so it's also almost instant, but you can tell when you go on a web page, when you go to System Control Panel, that usually it takes a little time here. See, it's checking extensions. That's where it takes a little time to go into all the list of all the software, and it gets all the availability of the extensions. So there's this update server, but it is also this file I didn't tell you about earlier is the installer file. This is a script file that is not required, but it's very nice to use. It's a very piece of code that is interesting to have for your users when they install your extension, because this file tells whatever is going to happen when somebody updates your extension. Oh, I'm not the right place. What's inside it is very simple. First of all, like I said earlier, you need the PHP at the top and the copyright and the license. If you don't have those, they will not pass the GAD certification. You need to have the define. This is not required here for now. I just added it because you usually do more stuff with it. You need to have the name of your extension, then you add install a script. I created a static version in a variable that will contain the version of my plugin. Because when people install your extension or update it, there's nothing that tells them which version you have installed. It just tells you this extension has been installed, and that's it. What I like to do is, once the extension has been installed, I like to give it to tell the user in which version they're on, and I like to add my logo and my name and website. So I do a little extra stuff. So you have two major functions that are available in Joomla. One is called pre-flight. The pre-flight function is actually something that is called before the extension is installed. This is very useful if you have if your actual extension needs a prerequisite. So if it needs another library to be installed before, or another plugin, or another module, so you can test it here in this space. And if it fails, you can return false, and then the installation will continue. It will stop before it gets installed. Same thing, after the installation is done, you have the post-flight method that's called, and you can actually put everything you want in it. Usually, most people, most developers put their credentials and images or whatever, or even information about change logs or things that need to be done after the install has been finished. You have a variable called type. A type is very useful because it tells you in which state you are in. If this is the first time the extension has been installed, if it's an update. For example, here I call my code every time the extension is installed or updated, but I want, for example, if I'm in the context of an update, I want to have a changelog or some kind of information about the changelogs show, but I don't want it on the first install, I just want it on the update. And that's basically it for this installer file. These are install, update, and uninstalled. They are methods that are used mostly for components, so you wouldn't necessarily need it for plugins. This is what happens when something installs or updates or is getting installed and uninstalled. Usually, in the context of a plugin or a module, it's done automatically, so you don't have to do anything. In terms of components, you may have to do something if your component has some extra tables added to the database, and you want to delete them at the end when somebody installs them, whatever. So this is pretty much it for a plugin. So is there any question?
So all of these two files have these functions, essentially, like pre-flight,
Yes.
post-flight.
What's the question?
Just install.
Yeah,
These
these
particular functions.
These functions are already, they're set up.
The standard for any kind of
Extension, yeah. Yeah,
They
exactly.
would only be found in that type in the install.
Yeah, this file is actually called only in the context of an install or an update, or an install also, yeah, a deletion. So that only applies to when you are in the console, when you are in the extensions manage install or update. Yeah, this is only happening there. It's never called anywhere else. Anything online?
No, no. It's hard to look at you. You're still here.
Well, we're going to go into the modules. It's going to be easy because I explained a lot of the stuff already. So, so in the context of a module, it's pretty much the same. You have to choose the name. Should I go here? Well, let's start at, start at the beginning. You have to choose a name. Once again, you have to check with the joomla extension directory to make sure your extension doesn't already exist as a name. Even though even if it doesn't do the same functionality, it has to be different. It's unique. You have to include the required files. Most of them are the ones I showed you already. To create a module file and a manifest file. Excuse me, I'm getting used to.
So we're seeing.
Yeah, I don't want that. Okay, but I wanted to change that too. But
Now we're seeing your script.
okay. All right. It's getting a little colder, yeah, here. Maybe the heat went down. So in modules, there are just a few more files. So when where you are in the context of a module, you still have your module manifest file. You have a main PHP file where everything's going to happen. You have a license file. Again, you may have an installer file.
That was interesting. A copy left license.
Yeah.
Yeah.
This one.
Yeah. Copy left license.
What?
I think that's
Copy left, not copyright.
That's
Yes.
part of the public licenses.
Does it say copy left?
It refers to the copy left.
Yeah.
That's the terminology we use.
Yeah.
It's not a copyright, it's copy left.
It's a lawyer thing.
Never heard of that.
Hey, it's not. I didn't make it up. I took it from the GNU. Yeah. Yeah, it's actually I never paid attention to it. You have to have in every folder your index.html, whichever it is. And in case of modules, in order to avoid to have all code in the same file, you can have some helper files. You actually use them usually to if you have to attack the database and get some data from it. You want to that done in a separate file so that you don't clutter your files too much. So the main engine for a module is the mod underscore the name of your extension .php. That's where everything's going to happen. Once again, the copyright, the licensing, the define checks to make sure it's in Joomla, in the context of Joomla. Then you could add a file, a line telling your code, well, I want to use anything that's going to be in my helper file. And then you can set up some parameters, which is generic. For example, here I have a field called count. It's a text field, but it's an integer. It defaults to 1. So I just tell my code whenever I miss that value, I want to make sure it's going to be a 1. So this is the default value in a way that you're going to get. Here I decided I wanted to create a module that will get all the contact lists I have on my site. So I'm going to create this bizarre thing here. I'm actually telling my help that I'm actually calling in my helper file this function that will get the parameters. I'm showing you right away. This is my helper file. This is the class used, and with the getParam function, a method. And in it, I'm gonna just say, okay, I want to access the database. This is the way of accessing a database. You use JFactory and getDBO is the way to get to it. I'm gonna create a query. I'm preparing my database object to have a query. I do a select out of the contact details, which is the table that's used to store all the contacts in Joomla. I'm going to get the ID of the ID column, the name column, and make sure that I'm only getting the contacts that are published. You may wonder why I use DB quote name. There are different ways of getting data from a database in Joomla in the code. They actually now require we go through quoting the names of the columns and the tables with the DB quote name to avoid a breach from hackers. That forces your query to have a specific, to be in a specific environment that will not be hackable. So I'm telling, so actually I could have done that. I could have done select and then, okay. Could have done that. Could have said select cd.id. cd is actually the name I gave to my table. In quote name you have the table you call and then the nickname you give it to. So then you know that cd.id is the column ID. But here it's not secured. Anybody can hack this. Oh, not anybody, because wrong intention people could go into your code and hack this and put anything else in it instead.
Is Joomla requiring DB quoting, or is it just recommended?
It's highly recommended now. Yeah, they won't tell you anything if you don't put it, but they're actually updating all their code to include this. It's not all of like that in the code. Well, I'm not going to go into that, but there are places in Joomla where it's not done, but it's more and more used. Then I tell my database object to set the query. And this time I tell him, well, I want to make sure that I don't get that more contacts than what the user wants. I had the field count here and defaults to 1, so it will default to 1 contact as an output, and if the user wants 10, he will get the 10. Something that's useful in PHP, if you want what you have in a value when you're testing your code, it's kind of a wild thing to do. You do a var dump and you put any variable in it, and that will output whatever variable values you have, and it will show on your front end. So do that only on testing environments. Then we do try catch, because we want to make sure that if the database query fails for some reason, we don't want to get into an error that will show on the website. We want to be able to have a handle on what errors are going to be caught. So here we do a load object list, which will load all the contacts that we have that we are getting from the query. We put that in a list, and if for any reason we have an error, we can do whatever we want with it. We can tell the system to enqueue a message and tell, like in this case, tell the user that an error occurred, that there's been a database issue, but and then return a null object, which means that we won't get any contact from that. Otherwise, if everything went well, we return the list. And we
have to define what the list is, and it just becomes whatever you assign to.
Yeah. Yeah, you don't have to. Yeah, it's not like C or Java. You don't have to tell what kind of type it is. So in this case, the load object list gives you an array as an output, and I tell my module, well, if the list is empty, that also works for is if it's null. Return nothing. Otherwise, we go to a template area, which is called from this line. You could layout path and get the layout default. This is required as a call in Joomla, so that through the module helper, you would first get all the overrides that you have done in your template, if you had some. If you had a module override of your template, this is handled by this little function. So then, in a module, you have then a directory called template, tmpl, and in it you have your default. That's what's going to be what's going to show in your output, in your front end. Here, I want to have a style sheet associated to it, which I had at the root of my extension. I call style.css. In it, I have a class called person, which is going to go and put some italic. So I call that style sheet, and in Joomla it's easy. You just say add style sheet to the document element and the document object, and it will add the style sheet in your header automatically. Then with my list, what I'm going to do is gonna have a UL element, HTML element. I'm going to give it a class person list, and for each item of the list, I'm going to create an li element of class person. Within it, I'm going to put the name, and each item of the list has the name, since I asked in my helper file to get the ID and the name. What happens is that when I run this, I do get on the right side here, you can see in the top position, I get all the contacts that are called by this little
Can you do
module.
an inspect? I want to see what that UL of that first class was. If you right click, you.
So
So the UL class at top,
Okay.
person one. It looked like it had PHP that was getting added to it. It's just person one.
yeah, because there's something else. There's an I added a little variable here,
Yeah.
module class. This is something that's added to all the modules in Joomla automatically, and that's module class suffix is whatever.
Yes. Okay, got it. So whatever
It's
class
whatever.
you put is the advanced module level.
Yeah, I'll show you what it is in the module itself. I have to move this around.
Okay, right? That's module
Yeah.
class.
Yeah, this is the one. So if I put space and test class, I save it. My mouse has given up. That's not going to change anything because I didn't add any, but no, wait, no, it should be here. Oh, no, I didn't change the right place. Sorry. I didn't change it on the server. So I changed it in my application, but not on the server. No, what am I saying? I'm stupid. Yeah, I'm stupid.
Do you have to clear hash?
It's weird that it doesn't do it. Let me check what if I have the right version. I just want to make sure I have it. Okay, equals okay. The body class suffix.
Don't feel bad. I bring things to my own class.
No, that's okay. I should be working. Well, for some reason, I don't know why that did. It doesn't work. Well, it should be working.
Could be overridden by it's already getting a module class from the position.
Did you actually save it in the?
Yeah, that's what.
Module? Did you save the place? That's what Steve here said, right?
It's saved.
Yeah, saved. Oh yeah, no way. That was not the right bear.
It's the one there.
It's not the wrong
You
bear.
added in the unpublished one. There we go.
It's always okay. Now it should work. Of course, I have everything on top of it.
Yeah, much better.
Yeah. So it allows you to do some specific styling for this module. So you can have the user can then add CSS with template, and then just for the test class, maybe have a yellow background just for this case. That's what it is. What else can I show you? There are places on the web where you can get information. I mean, the documentation is not, it's a little sparse, but you have quite a few things you can check out, and I would show you and I give you the links to them. But here you have a page where you can check what you can do with your manifest files, the XML files, you know, for creating the extensions. It gives you quite an extensive definition of what you can do with those files and what you can put in them. You can add SQL if you want to create tables. You can make sure that some files of your extensions are created into the media folder. There are a few things like that you can do with manifest files. And they give you some examples, even the one I gave you, like the script file for what happens when your extension is installed, how the update servers work, all that you can have available. There is a great book. I mean, I know you may know it already, this book. Programming Joomla plugins from GC, I don't know, I'm not going to say his name right.
Okay.
Right, Sma? From, yeah, by Red.
Oh, we use, is that Vireo?
Yeah. Yeah.
We use one of their plugins, the SSL, the Rex.
Mm-hmm. They made a few plugins, but they actually made a book specifically on plugins, and it's a gold mine. This is the best thing I ever seen written on Joomla for expert users, for people who create plugins and modules. And, well, this one is targeting plugins, but it explains, and it's funny because I gleaned working with Joomla, I gleaned a few things here and there, learning from Joomla and from creating my own plugins. But this one puts everything into perspective. I mean, and it's very, very easy to understand, and it goes in depth when you create plugins. So I really highly recommend this book. Also, we put it online, I guess. Did you put it already online?
I just sent the text to everybody, but I'll add it to your.
We'll add it. Yeah, we'll add it to the list of things. Let's see. I had. So the useful links I am going to give you later, also, for all the pages I've shown you of where to find information in Joomla. It's actually pretty easy to find information. You just type manifest file Joomla in Google and you find the pages. You have to be careful because some are outdated and work only for Joomla 2.5. I don't think it's a good idea to concentrate on 2.5 anymore. Go into Joomla 3, especially that very soon we get to Joomla 4. So we have to keep going forward and not backward. So I decided for my own extensions to just do bug fixing in 2.5 from now on and go forward with 1.3. There's no point of using, I mean, interesting enough, there are a lot of people that are still using Joomla 2.5, but hopefully people can get updated soon because it's really outdated now and not as secure as Joomla 3 is. So
over 2 years out of
What is it?
oh, yes.
End of 2014.
Yes. Yeah, and I still I have a plugin. I have a plugin that's called Custom Recaptcha, and I get still a dozen downloads a week, and it only works for Joomla 2.5. So I assume people are still building Joomla 2.5 sites.
They're trying to fix something
Yeah.
that's not working.
The thing is that there are so many websites that are stuck because there are so many customizations. That's usually the major issue with websites not being updated. Yeah, they can't upgrade because don't spend money. All the developer who made the changes is gone, long gone, and they get stuck if somebody gets stuck with an extension that's been so relied on and not updatable. Then you can't update Joomla. That's usually what happens with those sites, unfortunately.
Okay.
So
I'm going to end the virtual piece just because let me just put my mic on. Okay, I'm assuming everyone can hear me now because I turned on my mic. We're going to end the virtual piece of the meeting, so thank you very much for coming. And I'll send you an email with a zip of the presentations and all the files that Olivier put together for us. So thank you very much, everybody, and we'll talk at the next meeting. You are welcome, Warren.
thank you.
Okay.
Bye.
All right, bye, guys. All right, so now, you're welcome, Henry. I guess you can hear me. Keep texting.
Yeah.
That's cool.
Thank you for listening.
Okay.
What would be great is actually have a hands-on on stuff like that because